Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Mohammed, and I'm a graduate student here at McGill, studying educational psychology with a concentration in the learning sciences. Welcome to this webinar titled EdTech Talk in Class and at Home Learning During COVID-19. I think our aim today is to discuss how educational technologies or digital tools can help learning at home, but also in the classroom during COVID-19 times. Before I start, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping points to ensure the best connection. It can be helpful to close other applications on your device. By default, as you might have noticed, attendees' microphones and webcams are off and the microphone is muted. If you wish to communicate directly with the organizers or the panelists for this webinar, either for technical concerns or if you would like to ask a question, please use the question dialog box, which can be found on the dashboard to your right or at the bottom of if you're using your mobile. So welcome again. It is my pleasure to introduce today's panelist, Dr. Adam Dubey, who's an assistant professor and a graduate program director for the Learning Sciences program in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology. Dr. Dubey investigates how educational technology augments the learning process and teaches courses on emerging technology, educational technologies. And our second panelist is Sam Brutze, who's the founding principal of Clearpoint Elementary, an IB international school. Clearpoint is open for all students. He has worked in the Ministry of Education with Quebec English School Network before becoming a school principal at Terry Fox Riverdale, and was the computer consultant at Lester B. Pearson and Baldwin Carter School Board. He has retired and currently lectures at McGill University. A final reminder before we start, you can submit your questions to the panelists via the question box and at any time during the presentation. And we have a dedicated time at the end of the discussion reserved for discussion and for answering your questions. Now it's my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Dubey to give us an overview of the current policies put in place across Canada about returning to schools in the fall. Dr. Dubey?
Wonderful, and thanks, Sarah. So I just wanted to set the stage a little bit here, just with a brief presentation. So there we go, technology glitch. Yeah, so since the very start of this pandemic, there's been a lot of discussion about the health impacts as well as the economic impacts of COVID-19 on Canada, and that's been beginning since March. Now, in terms of health measures, social distancing is one of the largest governmental efforts that has ever been implemented. Billions have been spent on supporting the healthcare sector. Millions have been spent on research for testing, tracking, and treating of COVID. And for economic measures, again, billions are being spent on the wage subsidies, CERB, CSBEI, and other fiscal supports. Now, at the exact same time, I can't progress my slides. At the same time, in March, the pandemic halted education across Canada. All of a sudden, parents became teachers and teachers became online tutors. Now, this type of event is what is considered educational disruption. And there's robust evidence that disruptions to children's education can have profound and lasting effects on their lifelong educational and professional success. Even the typical summer break, students lose months of learning gains. And from research on previous natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, those events resulted in lifelong impacts on students' job success, and then this was particularly worse for minority students. So arguably, school closures from COVID-19 are the largest educational disruption in our history. So what's the plan? Well, in terms of a plan for a safe to return to schools, these vary across the country and they're changing rapidly. It seems daily. But most plans do have one thing in common. They all rely on technology to some extent, either in the classroom or at home. But this is easier said than done. There's a lot of demand for technology solutions, but there's just as much uncertainty and unease with how to use technology effectively. And there's no shortage of recommendations out there. Go online, you're going to see 100 people telling you 100 different things. But what advice really matters? So that's what we're going to have today, is a discussion on what matters. And I'll put it back to Sarah to start that discussion off.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Dubey. I think my first question that I would like to pose to Sam, I would like to, can you talk to us a little bit about how can technology and digital tools help learning in the classroom during COVID-19? And in a way, what are some of the features that indicates to parents quality learning?
All right, that's a big idea question. So the first thing is you'll get resources at the end. It'll be mailed to you, but I want to bring it back to the human level because in our audience we have elementary, high school, and university parents, profs, etc. So, but I'm not showing the slide, but I want you to jot this down on a piece of paper. There's two words you need to remember. One is information transfer, and the second one is sense making. So if you write down those two things, right now your brain is processing it in your dendrites, so you won't forget if I would have switched this slide. And I'm going to model what we should be doing with technology. So basically the school system works on these two words. The profs, the elementary teachers, the kindergarten teachers, the CEGEP teachers, they focus on transferring the information to the students. Parents actually do the same thing. And then the system functions that the kids need to make sense everywhere from kindergarten through university of their world through whatever the profs, teachers tell them. All right, so that's why these two words are important. Having said this, what COVID did, it disrupted that flow, because typically the information transfer is done at a school, at a university. The prof talks, shows videos, whatever. The kids go home, they do homework, they think about it, and then go back to school. So the disruptor with COVID is those two worlds have been broken in two, and now we find ourselves at home trying to replicate those two worlds. So basically, the key is, and you'll get a more detailed explanation, we are social beings. It's all about connections. The technology will never replace that. And so basically, how do we move the instructor-paced synchronous lecture from class to home? And that's caused all kinds of issues because kids have been working alone and parents have been scrambling. All right, and I'm going to propose that for us to be successful in a COVID-19 world, kids and profs need to build that sense of community in the home. And I'm going to talk about one piece of free software, which anybody can download. It's called Perusal. And basically, at home, we need to flip things around, not so much like in the flipped classroom, but basically the prof, the parent needs to have a connection at home, right? Through video conferencing, breakout rooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see that in my resources that you'll get later. But the key to success is we need to create an environment at home where kids can help each other with the work, where they connect so they're not working alone. So peer instruction in an online world looks differently, and that's what Perusal does. So basically, it's the social aspect of the technology that will save us. So again, information transfer, sense making, I'm saying that Perusal will be the one, which is a social e-reader where profs, parents upload articles, poems, doesn't matter what it is. Students do the reading and they comment on it, but every other student sees it, and it's done in a small group environment. So kids are connecting with the reading socially rather than socially, where they're helping each other. That's where the peer mediation, peer instruction comes in. The technology amplifies that. And then this leaves the prof and the parents ready to do their synchronous online activities with Zoom, where the instructor now is giving that information transfer, and the kids interact with each other live through breakout rooms, through constructivist activities. But the key is when that part is done, they're still connecting with each other, helping each other on the reading, using perusal. I think that's where you'll get the resources and links, and that's where my thinking is, to help the kids, parents, the sense making part, because you can't do that alone.
Thank you, Sam. And Adam, what about sort of learning or remote learning when you're learning at home? What kind of technologies can help parents specifically, and what are the features that would indicate that this is good quality learning for their children?
Well, thanks, Sarah. Well, I'm going to build a little bit on what Sam said, and there are two scenarios that I like to address. One is students learning remotely, but taking part of like a virtual school where the teacher's still leading this. That could be done at high school level, the university level. And the other scenario is students learning at home, but under the direction of their parents, so homeschooling or learning pods that parents are establishing. Now, for students learning at home, but as part of a class, like a virtual classroom, the key activity parents should be looking for are opportunities for their children to meaningfully interact with their teachers and their peers. And there's a lot of discussion a couple weeks ago about the number of direct contact hours that teachers are having with students. The problem with focusing on just the number of hours is that not all student-teacher interactions are equally valuable. Regardless of the specific technology that you're using, meaningful interaction is what's key, because it allows learners to share their thinking with others, hear others' perspectives, and get feedback on their ideas. Now, this can be done via live chats over videos like Zoom. It can even be done via text messaging. It can also occur asynchronously by the student recording themselves in a video or an audio, and then getting video or audio feedback from their teachers or fellow classmates. I did this last fall when McGill went to remote instruction. My students were uploading videos. I was watching them, recording myself in real time, sort of like a YouTube live feedback, and then I shared that video back with my students. For example, in a typical high school, teachers could create a private YouTube page, allow students to upload videos and provide comments on those videos, commenting to each other. And that's one way to have a high touch level of interaction and do it completely for free. Now, another way to foster interaction during remote instruction at home is through project-based learning in groups. Parents should look for their children being assigned multi-step tasks or projects that they can work collaboratively on with fellow students. Again, the technology used to allow for the interaction isn't as important as the interaction itself. So for parents with children learning remotely, the key is to look for meaningful interactions regardless of the specific technology that's being used. Now, that other scenario was homeschooling or learning pods, where the parent is trying to direct the instruction. What I just said still holds true. You want to use technology that allows your child to meaningfully interact with others. You want that social interaction around ideas, around their learning. You will also be looking for technologies that help your child practice subject-specific skills, like practicing math, practicing reading, practicing geography. Now, one example are educational app and websites. There are so many out there. In fact, there's over 120,000 educational apps just in the Apple ecosystem alone. And the problem is finding quality educational apps for your child, for your student. That is the challenge. You probably know websites that recommend good educational software, like Common Sense Education is a great resource. These are useful, but it's better to be able to judge this software for yourself. And there are many things you should look for in a good educational app, and I'm going to just cover some of the key ones. First off, the best learning app is one that your child, your student actually wants to use. Without their buy-in, with it becoming a struggle, it can be a wonder, why am I purchasing this if you're trying to force them to get into it? Now, a good way to find engaging apps is to look for ones that will be meaningful to your child. If you want them to practice math, and there are 2 math apps out there, and one is based on Minecraft, and your child loves Minecraft, consider the Minecraft app. Doesn't mean that you definitely use it, but just because your child likes it doesn't mean you should ignore it. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Now, being engaging and meaningful aren't enough. The app should have a clear learning goal, ideally one that relates to curriculum content appropriate to your child's age. So if you're going to be doing homeschooling, know your child's curriculum, know what they're supposed to be learning. And then when choosing apps, look for ones that mention that curriculum content. Also, watch your child use the app or try the app yourself. If you can't figure out what the app is trying to teach your child, what the learning goal is, after 5 minutes or so, find a different app. There's a lot of really bad apps out there, and I'm someone who studies these things. I play them, I use them, and I go like, I have no idea what it's trying to teach me. In the trash bin, the digital trash bin it goes. The other thing I want to say is you want to choose apps that require your child to be active thinkers and not just passive watchers. A lot of bad learning software was like bad learning television back in the day. It doesn't require your child to use their understanding to progress through the app. They just watch it. Now, using the app should require making decisions based on the topic being taught. Ideally, the app should even provide useful feedback when your child makes a decision, and that feedback should push them in the right direction. Finally, try to find apps that are developed with teachers or educators. In an app store like the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, there are written descriptions of apps. And for each app, if the team includes a teacher or learning expert, they're going to say it because they bothered to bring them on. Now, this doesn't mean it's a good app, but it will help narrow down the search. And then there you can look, is it engaging? Is it meaningful? Does it have a clear learning goal? Does it require active sort of minds-on learning? So those are some of the recommendations I would make for learning at home, some of the key ones. And we'll get to some more in some of the questions later on.
Thank you, Adam. So to sum it up in a way, we're looking for apps that are engaging, they have clear learning goals, they provide feedback, and they also use the active mind of the user in learning. I know that a lot of parents are worried about screen time, since a lot of students or their kids are learning virtually, but also socializing virtually using different social media. Is there an effect on their child's development, or can you talk to us a little bit about the effects of screen time?
Yeah, so now the important thing to know about limits on screen time is why limits were proposed in the first place. It exists not because screens or light from screens are damaging to people or children. There's some research suggesting that blue light from screens may make it more difficult for us to fall asleep if we watch them late at night. To avoid that, simply implement a no screen 1 hour before bed rule. No, the reason limits are proposed is because of displacement. That just means spending time on screens is time not spent socializing or being physically active. Pre-COVID, screen time was largely for entertainment purposes like Fortnite, and took time away from friends, being outside, talking with your parents at dinner, right? Which are meaningful things. Now, when you're using screens to learn, this is not wasted time. In fact, screens may be the only way to enable socializing safely. So my message to parents is do not worry about limits on screen time if that time is being spent learning or socializing. You can place limits on screens for entertainment, but not these other things. And the other thing I want to say is that the focus really shouldn't be on limits. Instead, focus on maximizing the amount of time your child, your student has to be active, has time for socializing, has time for interacting with family. If they are doing those things at healthy amounts, don't worry about the specific number of hours on screen. Particularly, don't worry if it's time spent learning. That's what I think and what I would argue the research supports about screen time.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in, just as a quick follow-up, in the resources you'll get after, there's been a lot of research on the screen time, and certainly at Lester B. Pearson or in the schools we've worked at, we take the approach less is more as far as apps. And I have some wonderful, and I'm sure Adam has too, we'll package it, that basically which apps make the kids make sense of their world. Are they creation apps? You know, off the top of my head, if you have a camera, a video editing, something like Seesaw Book Creator, that pretty much does it. And we'll send that out. All right. And you know, as far as screen time, everything in moderation for a purpose. And like Adam says, not just the Fortnite.
All right. I think I have a question to you, Sam. With all of these different apps and different sort of learning platforms, whether at home or if students are going to go back to school, what are some of the barriers in terms for remote learning in general? And even if students are going to go a few days to school and a few days at home, what are some of the barriers to the delivery of remote learning?
It's the equity piece. It's always the equity piece. My fear is that If parents start creating or doing their own pods, it becomes, the ones that have the money and the resources will do what they have to do, sometimes misguided. There's going to be a lot of people selling them products that don't work, so beware of snake oil salesmen. The pedagogy is deep and it needs to be properly done. So I would caution, don't become not the vigilante group, that's too strong. Don't set up your own mini universe and break the connection that you normally have with your school. As I said earlier, we're all social beings. As parents, we're smart enough to, what are we going to do for our kids that will also benefit our community? And when we say community, at all levels. So for me, the biggest barrier is the equity piece, that the parents that don't have the funds or the bandwidth are going to be left behind, which will do a big injustice to our society. So if we just don't panic, work together, the stuff that we're sending out is free. It's just not to take off on our own because we're so worried. You have to trust your community school. You have to trust your friends, but don't go off recreating the world, because people that will sell you stuff don't necessarily have the expertise, and it always comes back to the metacognition piece, and that's you need the people to do that. So again, this is a conversation. Beware of what people are selling you. It doesn't work. And what are you going to do so it becomes a social aspect? Your kids need to interact with their friends that they've interacted before, and technology is supposed to make that easier, not harder. And doing worksheets online is just as bad as doing worksheets in the regular classroom. It's the metacognition piece, thinking about the higher order thinking skills. And if we do that, everybody want to bring everybody along, from the average kid, the smartest kids, kids with special needs. And in this, I'm afraid in this environment, everybody will go off and do their own thing, and it's the worst thing that we can do.
What are your views, Adam, in terms of the barriers to the delivery of remote learning?
And I completely agree with Sam and his point about making sure that people don't divest from education, especially those individuals with the most resources. You individuals, McGill parents, or say, for example, that might be tuning in, you might have a lot of influence in your communities. And if you remove yourselves from education, and then our government's going to invest in education. And personally, I think the biggest barrier is the lack of support from government going forward. Teachers are going to be working themselves ragged and do what they can. Parents are doing the same while also working from home, but they can only work with what they have. Educators in Canada need money to purchase devices and software and to hire more tutors that increase the amount of meaningful student interaction. Parents in Canada need money to buy devices, software, and unlimited fast internet. There are so many more parents who worry about making screen time possible, not about limiting it to just the right amount. Now, what we have seen so far is most governments across Canada committing too little, too late. In the final weeks before school starts, there have been commitments of money for some of these issues. I think the federal government committed $2 billion yesterday. That's how quickly this is changing. This type of commitment was needed in June. So parents and teachers could plan and make it work. So what I would like to say, and I would like to urge parents to do, is that if you're dissatisfied with the education that your child, your student is receiving, don't necessarily go immediately to the teacher, right? Call your local MLA and your federal MP and demand that they provide support so teachers can work with more, not with less. That's what I think one of the biggest barriers is to the successful integration of technology and education, and to the success of education moving forward in Canada during the pandemic. And I did get the message. You may be seeing me smiling while Sam was speaking. People were telling me I was talking too fast. I will try to control that. That's why I smiled. It's like, yes, I get that a lot. I talk way too fast.
Thank you, Adam. I would just like to remind our audience that you can send out your questions to us so that the panelists can answer them. I took a look at some of the questions that were previously sent out by our audience, and one of the questions that I saw is with So what are some of the approaches or the advice that parents with high school age children with learning difficulties during online learning process? How could learning be enhanced and supported for kids with learning difficulties in a context of remote learning? I would start with Adam, and then perhaps Sam can answer.
I think, well, learning disabilities follows a wide range of scenarios. So one of the things that I would like to address is that with technology, one of the issues that it can introduce into learning that exists in a regular classroom, but technologies can also add this, are distractions during learning. And that can make it much more difficult to focus and to stay concentrated when the time is needed. And so one of the recommendations that I would make is for students, especially high school students, that they set up their devices at home to limit the number of distractions. And this can be done with many different pieces of software that operate on Windows, Android, and Apple to limit distractions. On Apple devices, you can use the downtime feature. On Google devices, you can use Google Family features. There's Windows software that does this as well, where you can actually stop apps from sort of pinging on your screen or from even being used during learning. So you can actually set it so that, oh, I want to make sure that these 10 apps are available, these 10 pieces of software are available during a certain period of time. And then that way you don't become easily distracted. This doesn't stop a high school student from doing something they're not supposed to do. We're never going to be able to stop that, but it stops this computer from interjecting, right, with distractions. That could be particularly damaging for individuals that already have difficulty directing their learning. So I think that's one of the things that I would say there around technology and learning disabilities.
Then I'm going to come back to the sense making. Typically, it's about the pedagogy. What I would do is, and this is for all students, because I think it's important that the special needs students see what the other students are reading, writing, reflecting. And so typically in a good classroom, face-to-face or online, there's a question, they're given assignments to read. Students can think about this. Students can annotate in the passage, ask questions. Hey, what does this word mean? I like this point. I don't like this. So the students are seeing. And so for gifted or special needs students who tend to be more focused in their worlds, it's important that they see what everybody is posting. They think about it, then a good teacher or parent leader or whoever's doing that, there's a class discussion. So kids are given, what do you think about this? What's your response? They see what everybody else does. That's what the tech does really powerfully, like perusal. Then, okay, and then there's a follow-up with, now that we've thought about it, now that we've seen what everybody else has said, what do you think about it now? And again, I've used this word 3-4 times, the whole metacognition piece. And again, that's what project-based learning does. You know, what's the question? You think about it, you poll, you discuss, you re-poll, and you explain. It's that sequence. And so technology amplifies that sequence. So it's not so much the tech, is what tech do you use that'll allow you to do that cycle.
Sorry, I was muted. I think one general question that I saw here from the audience, and I would like to pose it to both of you. I think one of the parents mentioned, for young primary students, hasn't online teaching proven to be inefficient or not efficient? And I'm wondering, from your opinion and also from the research that you've done and you've read, how can you answer this sort of question? Adam, maybe you can start.
So if you're saying for primary school, I would say generally the role of the teacher is critical with younger students. And we can talk about, you know, what age this begins around, but it's true that, you know, say around age 10, students are able to direct their own learning, to follow instructions. As they get older, age 12, they're able to do it even more so. But with younger students, it's the ability to direct themselves, to guide their own learning, to stay on task, to direct their own thinking, the metacognitive part that Sam was talking about. That's something that teachers facilitate in students. And so for parents that are considering teaching at home, one of the things that's very important for them to understand, if that's something you're considering, the younger your child, the more you're going to have to be involved in that directing of their learning, that providing of guidance. And so at-home learning with technology, if it's completely independent, is not something that's ideal, and it's definitely something that's incredibly tricky when it's done virtually. I think I saw there was a story on CNN yesterday with a young child crying at their computer, and I think the child was 7 years old, and it was an anecdotal story because the child felt so disconnected and had difficulty making connections. And so that's where personally it would the teacher interaction, that interaction with other students is really critical for younger students. And what I hope going forward is that we find solutions at a system level that allows young students to receive that interaction with teachers that they need. And then maybe for those older students who can better take advantage of technology and remote instruction, to maybe do so that there's more room for those younger students in classrooms. Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, exactly. For me, the little kids need to play in the sandbox, real, not virtual, ideally. And basically, I'm thinking, think of what your child at that age, because obviously this is a parent with younger kids. What were they doing in their school? Read technology. What was the teacher doing to set up the PlayStations? All those interactive stuff, and then. You know, the first thing when that question came up, Seesaw, the online portfolio that most schools use, it's for little kids. So you want the kid at home to do like a little chat with their friends, then they can draw a picture, they show it on the screen, but it's basically the thinking about it. So something like Seesaw, kids could create, take pictures at home, draw what is snow, why is the sky blue, etc., etc., etc. And then the beauty with the little kid, what's important is that this is recorded. That's where the tech is powerful. The child reflects what his definition of snow is, draws a picture, explains the picture, tells a story, talks to the grandparents, and something like Seesaw with the camera captures that. So that's where you're bringing that constructivist type real environment into an online learning. So for the parents of little kids out there, Seesaw, you'll see hundreds of examples of student created things as young as 4.
Okay. I think Sam, some of our audience member would like you to sort of elaborate a little bit on the metacognition cycle or sequence that you've mentioned earlier, sort of like the base of your arguments.
Okay, basically, oh my God, Adam, pipe in. You're the ed psych prof. Basically, we all think right now when I'm explaining this, you're saying, what's this guy saying? So basically, metacognition, the easiest way I can explain it is you think about your thinking. So in other words, you learn something new, and then, oh, what am I thinking about? The metacognition is you're thinking about your thinking of whatever you learned, and you're making it personal, and you're making sense of it. I mean, I probably butchered that, but that's basically the essence. So you want a little kid, like I just gave the example of a kid drawing a picture. He or she draws a picture of their backyard, or they take a camera. A classic assignment is, what's outside your window today in the middle of winter? Some kids have a storm, some kids are in the Bahamas. So you take a picture and then you tell, what do you see in the window? Then you have the kids look and listen to each other's explanation. But then when the little kid gets off, oh, in my backyard, there's snow. Another kid's backyard, there's a pool. Another kid's backyard is a street. So, oh, not everybody is the same. That's the metacognition. So thinking about the thinking. And I'll add that in the resource. There's some great short articles for parents that explain this. Adam?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add there is like, you can define it as consisting of roughly two parts. There's monitoring your thinking, which is like you actively thinking about your thinking, and then there's controlling your thoughts. And for adults, we do this all the time. We think about, what did I just say? Do I understand this? Where am I going with this next? And controlling your thoughts. It's going like, well, what it's planning. It's going, how should I interpret this? Oh, don't think about that. Think about this instead. And as adults, we develop this capacity. It improves much better when we're adolescents and when we're in early adulthood. But for young children, they have difficult, I'll try to slow down my speaking, they have difficulty with metacognition and need more guidance. And that's actually something that teachers provide by doing talk alouds, by thinking aloud. The teacher walking through their thinking out loud to their students is aiding that student's ability to understand their own reasoning and to internalize their teacher's voice into their heads. And that's something that's why instruction and skilled teachers are so important, is because it develops that metacognition in students. And then with Sam's approach with technology is that, what technologies are helping facilitate that, and gave an example. So, but just, give an idea of what metacognition is.
Oh, and I just thought of a quick question for those snake oil salesmen out there. When they're selling you something, how are you building experience? What are the metacognition pieces that whatever you're trying to sell me will help my child, whether they're 5, 12, 17, and you're going to see their face go, huh?
Thank you, Sam. Another question that we've received, it seems that a lot of parents are struggling with the multiple, I can say, platforms or apps that the school is using. So the math teacher is using Zoom, the English teacher is using, I don't know, Google Classroom. How, and this gets complicated, for parents, especially with kids in multiple grades. Is there a way to streamline the educational technology within the school, but also how can parents be able to manage all of these different platforms, at least from, I'll pose this to Adam, from the app's perspective or from the platform's perspective?
Yeah, we got this question in advance, and when I saw it, I just immediately felt for the parent. It was like, I'm being asked to use 10 different apps, and the parent talked about like all the passwords and the logins, and it doesn't work, and they're all different. And it's just, and I usually work with educators, and educators have this same concern. I'm being asked to use all this different software. I have to learn it all. This is a challenge of incorporating technology into classrooms and using different software. Because if you're trying to learn about mathematics, you're maybe not necessarily using the same math game that you're going to use for learning about reading, say, for example. So it requires different pieces of software. Now, one of the things I can say to help with this is just at the very basic level, you can create a login account, a Google login account, an Apple login account for your child that you then use across all the apps. So that way you keep that login information standard. So even if you're being given 10 different apps, the logins are the same, the passwords are the same, within that. Choose a strong password at the start. No one's trying to hack into your kid's math learning app, right? So like that's not a big concern. So, create a standard login. And then the other part is, for those individuals who have kids in school and the teachers are saying, please use this app, please use that app, use that app. What I would say is, like, if you're having difficulty figuring it out, email your teacher and say, hey, could you do a quick video on how to use this? The teacher can do a screen recording. I do this for my own students. I say, I want you to use Perusal, for example. I use it on my screen. I record the screen. I narrate the steps for how it works. And then I upload that to YouTube and I share it with all of my class. And that's something that if you're a parent and you're like, I can't figure out all this software, and you can ask your teacher. It's like, if you're having difficulty, other parents are having difficulty, and the teacher will probably go that extra mile and help you figure it out. But it is going to be a part of the problem, because there isn't necessarily one set of technology solutions that works for all subjects. Subjects are different, experiences are different. If you want a really effective piece of software, it should be designed to teach the thing you're trying to learn. So that results in a bunch of different resources that we're going to have to take advantage of. But it poses a very real problem of having to sort it all out, and it's a lot.
Okay, so there, I know it's not part of our thing, but a quick intersection. I will push back to the system. We said earlier that we need to stay together with the community and the school system. This is one area where, as smart parents, you're telling your school board, and I can say this, retired school principal, hey, we're doing all this. Give me what's the software? What are we using? Keep it simple. School boards have consultants, private schools have consultants, so you should be getting a 1 or 2 page cheat sheet. This is what our K-6 students are using, with a little video from the consultants. That's something that the school board or the school, if it's a private school, should be able to provide quite simply, because that's their job. It's not for you to sort through a million things. So that push back directly to the school system.
Thank you both. I think one of the questions, I'm assuming it's coming from a parent of a student who's in university level, and they were wondering if you guys or Miguel in general or universities are actually training professors on how to offer meaningful education at a university level. And that's something I guess one of the parents is interested to know.
So what I can say is institutions have done considerable amounts of effort have been put in over the summer at McGill University. I'm not sure about all universities, to provide resources for professors so that we can know how to use different tools. So McGill has the teaching and learning services, and they've created a whole website with now dozens upon dozens of online workshops for professors. It's like, say, for example, if Perusal was one of the tools, they put a workshop up on Perusal. Here's how you use it. This is what it's for. They've created long documents that say, hey, here's the type of activities you want in your classroom. Here are the technology solutions that you can use to create the same type of activity that you would in class, but then to do it online, to do it remotely. So from an institutional standpoint, they're trying to connect educators, high quality experts with the tools so that they can get that information out to their students and create rich learning experiences. The other thing that they're doing is that they're tapping individual professors in each department. So say, for example, in our department, I'm one of the remote instruction support individuals, and I have colleagues contacting me and they go, hey, Adam, this is the type of activity we want in my class. This is what I would usually do. Is how can I do this virtually? We don't want to change the way we're teaching. We want to do that using technology. And so I work with them, working together to try to find solutions. It's like, this is how we recreate that experience. And a lot of effort has been put in since, say, for example, university shut down last winter to be able to move our classes online and to re-envision and to recreate these type of experiences using these technologies. So the universities are putting out workshops, they're putting out tools, they're assigning individuals to work with other people one-on-one. So there has been a monumental effort at the university level for that. And I would say it's similarly with teachers at the elementary level. You know, they're leveraging the expertise of each other. That's something Sam can speak to. But they're working with each other, turning to their colleagues for resources, for help. So we're all trying to come together to create as high quality instruction as possible during all of this.
Yeah, Adam is exactly right. And my hope there, because COVID will be over at some point, is that a lot of the motivational, a lot of the engagement techniques, because to teach online is actually harder to connect because you don't have the body language, the social interaction, is that when things get back to normal, a lot of these best practices will come back, so the profs will use them on campus. But yes, so what Adam just said, as far as the resources and support, the school boards are doing that. I know the CEGEPs are doing that, and every university is doing the same thing. I've never been so busy on Twitter, remote teaching and learning. No one wanted to know much about online learning. In the past 6 months, it's like the search for the Holy Grail.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that we received, it's a bit specific, but I have a feeling that a lot of parents are struggling with it. The question has disappeared, especially when parents have used Zoom throughout the summer and last semester. They struggled, seems, with the idea of breakout rooms. And I'm just trying to find the question because it disappeared. So the question is, how can teachers and parents manage the breakout rooms so that the space is functional and not a hideout? Hard for teachers to be in every room, and perhaps there are other ways that parents can also manage this. Could you speak a little bit on this?
Yeah, let me go first because Adam will piggyback. I'm going to talk about it from personal experience and he'll correct me or we'll switch, but I'm sure we'll come up with the same things. It's good pedagogy, good teaching, it's sense making. That comes back to the snake oil salesman. The point of a breakout room is you don't say go and do and chit chat. It has to be scaffolded and it has to be taught. So if the kids have done the reading, they've annotated, like using perusal, et cetera, then there's a task. So when with my 96 media students, when they go to a breakout room, it's a small group, it's always the same group. One class, a person is the timer, one class, the person is the recorder, one class, the person asks the question, and there's a sheet, there's work. So when I did that with my 96 students, I created 16 breakout rooms of 6 students in each, say 20 minutes to do this. There was a task. I got the Google Doc, there was a report. When you come back to the main room, that comes back to the metacognition piece. Okay, this is what you discussed as a small group. What does this group say? When you're back together, then there's that discussion. So yeah, you throwing them into breakout rooms, it's like it has to be scaffolded. It has to be very specific. And that's one of the challenges that I would say profs that are used to lecturing and just going off. The breakout room recreates that classroom small group discussion around the table, and that's essential in the real class. And for me, the reason Zoom is so popular is because of that, if used properly.
And I'll just add, so I completely agree with Sam. It's providing that structured activity for those breakout rooms. I would argue that if you're a professor and you're just saying, okay, here's a question, discuss, and you're not giving people a goal or a framework for that discussion, it's just as bad as a breakout room. 1 or 2 people talk, most people don't say anything. The only reason they talk is because you're walking around. Like, that's not a good discussion anyway. So you want those structured discussions when you give them goals. There are tools for monitoring those types of discussions, to some extent that might help, promote that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that research shows that previously with university level education, when individuals are working in sort of breakout sessions online before this, a lot of wasted time revolved around technology glitches. And so when students were off task, it was actually them trying to problem solve, like, this isn't working, that isn't working, how do we do this, what's the goal? And so that's where, for those teachers and those professors, if you take a class to actually make sure that everyone's familiar with the tools that you want to use. Okay, so this is how we're going to do this. This is how the tools work. Let's get this out of the way so that when you are together in these rooms, you're actually focused on the learning task and not these technology hiccups that come up, because those can get in the way of actual learning. And then to have also structured activities. So that's something else I'd recommend.
And so I think a follow-up question to that. So does that mean that parents have to be present during their kids' online learning experiences to recognize these different factors that are there within the classroom, whether it's like the breakout rooms, the tasks are clear and goals are clear, or how should parents, I don't have children, but like I'm just trying to think, how would I be able to recognize these different things?
I'm going to talk as a principal, and Adam can piggyback because this is a systems issue. So basically, you should be getting, as a parent, you should be getting something from your child's teacher. If they're in kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, the teacher has to be present in the breakout group. That's a given. Parents don't have the expertise. Certainly grade 3 and lower. There's other ways of recreating that through Seesaw, whatever. But for the breakout room, there has to be work that the teacher is assigned. And when the breakout rooms happen, and that's why the asynchronous piece with perusal is important, there has to be a teacher. Imagine a parent has 3 kids, elementary, high school, university. It's not. That's the school's role. And that's how that's to be managed properly. So because parents will simply go nuts.
Yeah, you can't do everything. You can't work your own job from home and watch your 3 children. It's just not possible. So it's about structuring these things for success.
Okay, I think the last question which is an interesting question to sort of end our webinar with. What are the missing functionalities in the existing softwares that you both know of that are available in the market that you would like it to be invented in the future? And where are where are you struggling the most to help facilitate online learning processes?
Can I go first, Adam? So you can, or you can go first, because
I'll start with a brief one. So most of my research is on interactive educational games, specific technologies and tablets and some other things. But within educational games, they're very popular. But one of the things that they actually don't do is they do not incorporate communal learning, cooperative learning. They don't have the social piece. Most educational technology software is designed for an individual student to do by themselves. It actually doesn't incorporate all of these interactions that we focused on today. None of that's in most educational software because it requires a chat room, it requires it requires servers to run the software, it requires people to have a back and forth, and it requires logins. So adding the social piece to most software adds a bunch of other extra costs to development. And then the people that are making this software, they go, well, it's like, well, I can add this, but then people don't use it, or they're worried about privacy, and legitimate concerns about privacy with their kids on these devices. But that's actually a piece that's missing in a lot of educational software that exists, is that social aspect. To be able to engage in collaborative learning, it's just not there. There are some things that allow it, and those are the ones that are largely adopted, like say for instance, Seesaw and other things. It's why Zoom is being adopted, but those are the reasons those are adopted in schools, is because they allow for it. But most software is meant for individual learning that exists. Now, that's a problem.
I'll answer somewhat facetiously and move forward. Basically, look, is that parent the head of a small tech company? I've been involved with educational software, the promise of transforming learning, since the 70s when I started. Yes, I am that old. And it's exactly what Adam said. Most tech companies are in it, let's be honest, for the money to start, right? The really good ones are snapped up. They're usually invented by teachers. I'm thinking Socrata, Book Creator, Seesaw, and the bigger companies buy them up. But it comes back to what you do. And I would argue with 120,000 apps, give me 5 or 6. I don't need new apps. It comes back to the pedagogy, to what you do with the tech. And Adam is dead on. The social piece, that's the key. So if that parent is a head of a small tech company, you need to have a coding, and a lot of the coding, the new coding stuff is really incorporating. It's, think of your work. Working as a team, collaborating with others, solving a problem together. That's how we want in your job. That's how we want our kids to learn, because moving on in the future, it will be about this collaboration, this working together, especially since so many people are going to be working remotely. So it's one of the ironies. So I would say someone that comes up with that would do well. But to me, I have enough software. I can pick the apps out there to keep us busy if used properly for the next 20 years. And that's the metacognition piece, the social annotation. So we need to stop chasing the app. It's like, what do we want our kids to learn to become global citizens, and how can we best prepare them? And then the key is simple: socialization, team building, working with others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And I guess the only final things, I know we're right up against the time here, is that I guess one of the things that's coming up is individualized instructions. And one of the things that you're seeing in software, the big buzzword is artificial intelligence, to try to identify the learner's profile and then give them content that's suited to them. So that's something else that's starting to see developments in, but it's still early days. I don't buy that anyone's doing that well. So if you're a company and you're trying to do that, if you're a parent saying like, oh, this one's going to perfectly individualize to my child, it's probably not very good at it. At this page, it's like, it'd be nice if a child could try the app out and it figures out, what they know, what they don't know, and then it teaches them new information. But we're talking in the future. right? So like we're not there yet,
But
sort of things.
we're back to Skinner's thinking machine. Anyways, we're stopping here.
Yeah, we're stopping. Yeah, keep going.
So as we have 3 minutes left, I would just like to know if you have any final remarks to the parents and to our audience about remote learning, using technology, the use of technology in general, but also the idea of sending their kids to school, and how can technology help them in achieving quality learning.
I just say the take-home message is that quality instruction, quality education comes from focusing on how learning works, how learning occurs, and on individuals with expertise in education, focusing there first, and then asking, okay, what technologies can we use to help, to facilitate? Not going like, the technology is going to change everything. No. We know what good teaching looks like. Now let's use technologies that facilitate it. Right, so that's the solution going forward. And then I just want to reiterate Sam's earlier point, is that we need to stick together as communities and not sort of separate ourselves out and go like, well, I can help just my small group here. We're going to be fine by ourselves. We all need to come together to try to make education work. And I would say that do that by putting pressure on your school boards, on your representatives, right? Trying to make education a focus and not just one piece of a puzzle that we're trying to solve during COVID.
Yeah, I would say that exactly what Adam said. For university profs and CJAP, the kids are older, so that's pretty much going to be, it'll be an interesting experience to see how it evolves, certainly with Sec 4 and 5. With the younger kids, always focus on their development, keep the community. Probably your teachers are just as nervous as you are. But if we stick together, we'll get over this. And remember that tech is supposed to make things easier, not complicate. And what Adam said earlier, the bug your member of parliament, that's for sure. And then ask of your teacher, of your school or school board to synthesize and get this down to a bare minimum. And what may work on the West Island would be different than downtown, the East End, the South Shore. And that's where the school boards or the schools need to adapt. It's not one size fits all. Less is more. And I will add the resources that I've talked about in the handout.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam and Sam, for joining us today. I hope our audience enjoyed the conversation, and there are a few questions that we weren't able to answer, and I know that they can reach out to the organizers if they have more questions, so that these questions can be funneled to you that you can answer in a later time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you a very good day.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sam. Great conversation. Go Riders, everybody.
Bye-bye.